So we start with Africa in the 11th to 18th centuries. The problem with Africa is a lot of their art forms are created out of organic materials. So we oftentimes don't have older versions. This is the same problem we deal with in a lot of ancient societies. Even some periods of Greek history, for example, where they're using mud brick. We have those pieces that are built falling apart over time. So we see the same problem in Africa, but we do still have a couple of pieces. Now, during this period, the 11th to 18th century, we see the rise of monarchs in Africa, and we see an increase in Christian and Muslim activity. And this will have a massive impact on the cultures of Africa, because anytime you see a huge religious shift, you're going to see some changes. So we move to Ethiopia. An example of one of their bedrock churches. This is literally a church built out of bedrock, because things like trees and stones that are good for cutting and moving are in short supply. So why not use what you have? So Christianity arrives in Ethiopia around the early 4th century. And what they will do is they will build into the tufa, this volcanic stone that they have naturally occurring in Ethiopia. Tufa is soft and easily worked, but difficult to work with, as with any subtractive method, because you have to figure when they build this church, they're not building it with blocks where you don't have to worry about the thickness of the wall. Instead, the wall is one piece, so you do have to be concerned about how thick it is. Will it still be stable? By the way, on the right, you see a couple of trenches that lead down into the central hole in which you find this church. Looks very awkward, but keep in mind, in Europe, they're doing the same thing. The Etruscans, who exist just prior to and at the same time as the Romans, will be building a number of their structures underground in a similar form. So, as we look down the hole further, you can get a sense of just how large this structure really is. Inside, it's going to feel like any relatively regular church. And moving inside, pictures are very difficult to come by because the Ethiopian church is particularly conservative when it comes to images. But you get a sense of that architectural feel that we get within the church. They're bringing in ideas, the use of the arch, etc., that at the time in the 13th century are being used in the great cathedrals of Europe, and here they're using it in Africa where we wouldn't necessarily expect it. Now, the walls are not just carved, they're actually painted as well, and here we see some of the frescoes that exist within the church. Now, these look a little more modern, they have a different sense and style to them, and that's to be expected. We're in a completely different area. They have different artistic ideas, so we see the images tend to be fairly flat, but yet very, very colorful. We see images that don't take sort of a Western perspective on everything, especially when we look at the piece on the left. And these images are updated on basically as needed. The reason for it is in Ethiopia, they look at art differently than we do. They look at it as something that is meant to be replaced, is meant to serve its purpose and then move on. Whereas in the West, we tend to look at it as something that must be preserved. Actually, we see this elsewhere in Africa, in Kenya and elsewhere, where they'll create pieces that are meant to fall apart, that are meant to be effectively ephemeral art, just not in the settings that we would expect to find it.